Yeah, thank you very much, Volker, for this invitation to this program. I don't know how we can call it, a program or which is extremely interesting. So what I wanted to discuss with you this afternoon is mostly the Digital Market Act and the Digital Services Act, and what are their ultimate goal? Because sometimes we are very much into the detail and we lose, let's say, the broad picture. Or now with this geopolitical tension, I mean, we sometimes also lose the objective of the of those two laws. And the point I want to make today is that in fact, as Volker mentioned, I think one of the goal, I mean, maybe the ultimate goal of the DMA and the DSA is clearly not to attack or put so-called tariff on the US firm. And on that, I would like already to push back a little bit the Trump administration rhetorics, because I would think, and we will discuss that in a minute, but I mean, in a short term, at least, the main beneficiaries of at least the DMA will be US firm too. I mean, so it's not a question of EU versus the US, but it's also a question of some smaller US firm versus a bigger US firm. But again, that aside, I think the main objective of those two laws is in a way to make the cyberspace according to our value, our European value, which are clearly very different from the one of the Trump administration, and also to regain some of the promises of the internet, which, when the internet was developed in the 90s, there was a lot of promises. Some have been achieved, other not. And I would say that one of the ultimate goal of the DMA and the DSA is to restore those promises. So that's why I think we could characterize the DMA, the DSA as having an objective of making the cyberspace great again. So basically, I wanted to have my presentation is 3 segments. First, what is this, the DMA, the DSA, and how we can maximize their synergies. Then, and there I wanted to go back to Lessig and his 4 forces of regulators of the cyberspace. Law is one of the elements, but there are many others elements which are important, and I think law alone will not make the work. So it's very important to, as Lessig teaches, to go at the other force, at the other regulators of or regulative force of the cyberspace. And finally, then I wanted to come back of this ultimate goal and maybe discuss a little bit the geopolitics of all of this and maybe there also in the discussion. So, let's start with the first segment. And I think, I mean, I guess some of you or maybe everyone has seen the movie Matrix. And if you want to, summarize the DMA and the DSA is to alleviate that we end up with that kind of scenario where all of us are in one ecosystem, in one matrix, without really knowing it, without, having the choice. Or, I mean, in the matrix, I mean, some try to fight it, but a very small minority. And so, I think the goal of the DMA in particular is to alleviate a matrix scenario for the society to some extent. Now, first we have 2 laws. One is the Digital Services Act, and here I really want to be extremely brief and to take a kind of very broad view. I mean, I guess most of you, if not everyone, are quite familiar with it, but I just want to characterize in a very broad way, because that's the goal of this presentation. So the DSA is really focusing on platform having systemic influence power, influence on the opinion of the people. So you are a very large online platform, a very large search engine. If you cover more than 10% of the EU population, and so far 21 or 22 now platform have been designated, and that is mostly social network, marketplace, and platform delivering adult content. And then you have 2 search engines which also have been identified. But so I would say the DSA is mostly a content moderation law, but not only, okay, because it's also applied to marketplace. The role of the DSA is not so much to create more competition in the market, but it's to change the internal governance of those platforms, those big platforms which have a systemic influence power. Okay, and how they try to do that by a number of obligations, but mostly by having better content moderation practices, by improving the consumer protection and empowerment, and by having more transparency on the risk that those platforms can create. And I would say that one of the most important provisions of the DSA is the fact that every year the platform which are regulated, the big platform which are regulated, have to do a systemic risk assessment, which allow everyone to understand better what are the risks of those platforms. Now, those systemic risk assessments have to do it every year, have to be done every year, and then they have to be audited by an independent auditor. We had the first exercise last year, and then we are in the second exercise. It is clear that, given that it is new, we are still in a learning process. And I would say that most of the first systemic assessment report were mostly, what they did already. So it was nothing really new for the firm. But I guess that as we progress and as we go along, those systemic risk assessment will become better. The auditing of this will become better. And, it's a bit like when we invent accounting auditing. At the beginning, there was nothing. We had the scandals. And so it was decided to have a better control of it. So I think it's the same kind of trend. And maybe there are some parallels to have with the independent accounting auditing, which is not done in every company. I must also say that what some have called the original sin of the internet, which is the fact that several, not all, but several of the big tech platforms are financed by online advertisement. And why it's called sometimes an original sin, it's because that is changing, of course, the incentive of the platform. And we should always remember that the two co-founders of Google, so Brin and Page, in their famous 97 paper on PageRank, which is an academic paper on the search engine, had this famous footnote where they say, under footnote 8, where they say that they think that the search engine should never be financed by advertisement because it will screw the incentive. So, history, that's, one example where the early promises of the internet have not been really achieved. Now, the DSA is not about that, okay? So it regulates a little bit the online advertisement, in particular, depending on which data you use for profiling, and also it protects better the minor. But for the rest, the business, that part of the business model is not really touched. Okay, but so basically, the DSA is about changing the governance of the matrix, if you want. The second is the DMA, and there the role of the DMA is mostly to create more competition, so to have different ecosystems in competition one with another, And there, the DMA, as we probably or know, it's about systemic gatekeeper power. So it's the platform which are really indispensable to reach a big part of the 10% of the EU population. Now, that is determined with a number of quantitative criteria, financial, geographical, and user size, but also some qualitative criteria too. Now, some people say that we need for big tech a utilities regulation. Now, the problem is that, of course, everyone has his own conception of utilities regulation. But if we take the traditional concept of utility regulation, which is the one in telecom, and indeed, with Volker, we met at this fantastic town next to Madrid, where we discussed that. But telecom, water, electricities, and so on. And those kind of law, at least before the liberalization, were mostly retail price control law, okay? Now, the DMA is not at all that, The DMA aims to push competition, so to, in a way, support entry by opening the platform and the data. There is a number of, there is more than 20 obligations, but basically, if you want to summarize the DMA obligation, I would say it's opening platform and data. So to facilitate, the entry on the supply side, It's to facilitate user switching and multi-homing, to facilitate entry on the demand side or reduce barrier to entry on the demand side, and to prevent ecosystem anti-competitive leverage through, for instance, practices of tying and leveraging. So basically, you know, I think what we do with the DMA is not dissimilar to what was done with the opening of the telecom network in the 90s, because the role of the telecom the way the telecom liberalization happened in Europe was not to break up the telecom operator, but what to open them up with the unbundling rules and so on. Here, you know, with the interoperability rule, the data portability rule is in a way the same kind of approach. So it's not the traditional utility approach, but it's more a kind of pro-competitive regulation. Now, one thing also what the DMA is not, it's that it doesn't really fundamentally change the business model of those companies. Yes, it affects them. That's very clear. And you know, Apple, for instance, which has a tradition of having a closed business model, is very much affected by the DMA because the DMA is about opening that ecosystem. But it doesn't break them up. For instance, it doesn't say, okay, if you do hardware, you cannot do operating system, or if you do operating system, you cannot do search engine. And it's mostly the intervention take place mostly at the service level. So I would say app and app store, not so much at the infrastructural level, although some element of the infrastructure like the OS is touched. Okay. Now, a last point I wanted to say in this first segment is that, you know, for this to work, it's really complicated, of course, because we are talking about very big company, we are talking about very complex market, which evolve all the time. So, you know, the old, I would say, way of regulating, which is to say the regulator know what is good and impose it to the operator, to the platform, that's not possible anymore here. What you need is a form of participatory regulation or agile regulation. And for those who do regulatory studies, you know that it's very much fashionable today to speak about this, but really that's what it is. You know, you have on the top, and I would say as a chef d'orchestre, as an orchestrator, the European Commission, which is in a way the big tech EU regulator, okay? And note that it's quite remarkable because in general in Europe, you don't have a European regulator. You have European law, but national regulators like you have in energy, in telecom, in rails, and so on. So to have a European regulatory authority, in fact, it's only the second time in the European history that you have this. You have that in the bank, the ECB being the regulator, the financial supervisor of the biggest bank of Europe, and now you have that for the big tech. But that's only the second experience we have. You know? So that's quite also remarkable in terms of EU integration. So you have the Commission as the main regulator, but of course the Commission cannot do that alone. And in a way, you know, as much as the platform are orchestrating an ecosystem, the Commission should orchestrate also its own ecosystem of compliance and enforcement. With who? In the orchestra, if you want, you have the gatekeeper themselves, and the gatekeeper have to, or the big tech, and they have to, put some compliance officer within the firm. They have to produce compliance report, and in the context of the DMA, the second generation of the compliance report have just been published last week. And then if you have some whistleblower, I mean, they need to be protected. So you have the gatekeeper. You have the business user, so the app developer or the end user, which can lodge a complaint, can help the Commission to do its job. And then, of course, even if the Commission has the ultimate word on all of this, the national authority, and national competition authority, national platform authority, telecom authority have a lot of role to play to support the Commission in doing its job. Okay, so that's what the DMA and the DSA is about. Now, as I said, as Lessig, as Larry Lessig told us in his very famous book, Code and Cyberspace, Code and Other Law of Cyberspace, he shows that, the law is only one regulatory forces for the cyberspace, but you have also three others, which are absolutely essential, which are the market, the technical architecture, and the social norms. And so what I think is important to do is to see how the DMA and the DSA will change those other three forces, because I think that if those other three forces do not change, the DSA and the DMA alone is just a piece of paper, okay? So in terms of technical architecture, as I was telling you before, the DMA really aim to lead to more open architecture, okay? Through access to the big tech platform, through API, standardization, and so on. And so there is an important effort of standardization which should, accompany the DMA enforcement. Also, in terms of that's the business user side. In terms of the end user side, and maybe you have been confronted to it. I just had my update of the iPhone, and I had to choose again some browser. And so, the thing is that the interface to design and manage, the interface designed to manage the end user choice will also be affected, okay? So on both ends, supply side and demand side, you have some change of architecture. And then in terms of the governance model, or in a way, you need to build governance model to have those new architecture to work. So for instance, there is an initiative which is run by a number of big tech of helping the data portability that is requiring all a governance to ensure that the data can move easily from one platform to another. And, it doesn't suffice to have a law, you also have to have governance system to ensure that. In terms of market, I think we can see the DMA as a form of liberalization policy. And so that's why, I make this comparison also with telecom and energy before. But I would say that telecom and energy was a liberalization from the state power. The DMA could be a liberalization from the big tech power. And, I have this famous picture of the end of the Berlin Wall. So, of course, maybe it's a little bit too much, but I would say that is the idea, we try to remove the gate of the gatekeeper, or the DMA try to remove the gate of the gatekeeper to tear down those walls, if you want, to be sure that you can move easily from one ecosystem to another, okay? And that you are not imprisoned in the matrix. So basically, the DMA is much more than just PD antitrust, as it is often said, because the DMA aims to not only alleviate that the market structure is made worse by the big tech, which is, the role of antitrust in general, is to be sure that the existing competitive structure is not degraded, but it is to improve the market structure, to make it more competitive, okay? Now, of course, you can imagine that it leads, and it is indeed leading to massive opposition of the big tech, which have now captured the US government, as you know, and so, of course, the US government now is pressuring, as we have seen even yesterday, the EU not to do anything. But because it's normal in a way, because they lose economic, but also they lose, and that's different from, a traditional liberalization law. I would say it's even more complicated or more disruptive for the big tech, because they also lose their governance power. And of course, for the user, it's also not easy, because it creates a lot of instability, most of us are used not to choose among platform or among services and so on. So now, when I received this 2 days ago, this choice screen of which browser I should take, and it's something I'm not used to it. So you have to learn this, and also, and I think that's very important, you have to know who will be the trust maker now, because one of the big advantages of the big tech is that they were creating the trust in their ecosystem. Now, if you open them up, who will be the trust maker? And that's not clear. I take you a very simple example. Let's suppose that you have all your history of purchase on Amazon, and you decide to port that series of data to a new marketplace. This marketplace is hacked, a victim of a cyber attack, and all your history of what you have bought over the last 2 years on Amazon end up on the dark web. No. Clearly, it is the new platform which is responsible, because it's the platform which has been hacked. But maybe Amazon will have a reputational risk to it, and the people will, the person where the data will be on the dark web may lose trust in all of this. So you see, I think there is a trust issue which should not be underestimated, and that the DMA and the DSA do not tackle very directly. Last point is regulatory force, or the one that I mentioned. Lessig is the social norm, and this one is clearly the most difficult to change because, you know, social norm tends to be sticky, you know, for the big tech, because they have to move from an environment where, you know, they were, you remember Zuckerberg who said we have to move fast and break things, to an environment of deep compliance. And that is really a completely cultural shift, you know, for those companies, which doesn't make the thing easy. We should not underestimate that, because, you know, I think, for instance, if you take Apple, they are really convinced, but deeply convinced, that a closed system is better than an open system. And if you read the biopic of Jobs, or if you see the movie, if you read the book on him, or if you see the movie Jobs, you could see how Steve Jobs had to fight its own shareholders in the 70s and in the 80s to impose this closed system within the company. So you can imagine that it's not, you know, it's not only a question of business. For me, it's also a question of nearly religion. You know, it's like if you were asking to a Muslim to convert to Catholicism, or vice versa. You know, it's at the same level. It's a cultural level, you know? And that's why also it makes the enforcement of the DMA not easy. And in terms of the user, I would say that, as I said, I mean, they have to learn to choose. And that's not easy either, you know, because when you are not used to do it, you have to, there is all a learning process. So that is why, I mean, we should not expect, you know, a big bang from the enforcement of the DSA and the DMA, but it will be progressive. And finally, but I think I discussed that already, is that I think the regulators, and in this case, the European Commission, has a lot to learn on how the platforms are functioning to do their own job. So basically, you know, what is making the success of the platform, if you think about it, you know? Why? One is because they orchestrate an ecosystem, okay? And they have a series of governance rules which make this ecosystem working for everyone, a kind of win-win situation, okay? That's what the Commission should do, as I was saying, to build an ecosystem of compliance and enforcement. B, the platform are experimenting a lot and adapting all the time. And if you know what Elon Musk is saying about Dodge, it's the same. I mean, he said, we will do a lot of mistakes, but we will correct them quickly. Okay, so that's really the approach of the big tech. And I would say that that's not necessarily a bad approach, you know, sometimes when you do public policy. There is an interesting OECD recommendation on agile regulation, which was been published in 2021. And one of the points of this recommendation is to say you have to go from a regulate and forget approach, which is the old regulatory approach, to an adapt and learn approach. And I think, you know, indeed, this is something that can be done, and you can do their experimentation before the remedy are imposed with a lot of A/B testing, or after the remedy have been imposed by adapting them if it doesn't work. And finally, the third element which makes the success of the big tech is the massive use of big data and AI technology. And here again, I would say that the regulators can learn a lot from there to use better technology. Okay, so this is, you know, my point is just to say that you know, it will require a big cultural shift for everyone, a big change of social norm, and that will not be easy. And the last segment of the conversation is, you know, what all of that should lead us to, and whether it could make the cyberspace great again. And, you know, to go back to the early promises of the internet, I always like to go to this very interesting declaration of the independence of the cyberspace that John Perry Barlow gave at Davos in '96, so nearly 30 years ago. No, I mean, Barlow, you probably know, was a very famous internet libertarian, and as often the libertarians are extremely naive or self-interested. I mean, you can choose, or both. But I think what was interesting in the Barlow Declaration is this. I mean, he said that, you know, the cyberspace, the big tech, the tech platform, at the time they were not big at all, we will deliver a better world than what the states have done. Okay, and so his main plea in Davos in '96, when you had the first, tech regulation, the e-commerce directive in 2000, and the equivalent in the US. He was saying, okay, leave us alone. We know better how to deliver a better world. We are creating a world where everyone can enter without privilege of possibly economic power. We are forming a new social contract, so it will be much better. Now, 30 years after this declaration, we can realize that some of the promises have been indeed realized, others not at all, okay? And so basically, what I would say that the DMA and the DSA aims to is to, go back to at least some of those early promises, not all of them, but some of them. And basically, so the DMA is really about disintermediating the global intermediaries that the big tech have become with more open and decentralized technology. But, and that's the trick, without losing the value creation in orchestration, because we should never forget that there is a lot of value creation in that ecosystem which is orchestrated by the platform. So I would never say that opening everything everywhere is the right policy approach. So I think we have to be careful. In some cases, it's better to leave the platform to choose whether they open it or they don't open. In other, it's better to open. And without losing the service integrity and the trust and the security and privacy that those companies are offering. Now, by saying that, I don't want necessarily to buy all the Apple argument, which is saying, okay, you are opening everything, so you are completely destroying what I have built, because it will make the things less secure, less private, less easy to use. But there is some element that we should take into account, and in a way, it's already in the DMA where you have some possibility for security and privacy defects. Well, so that's the first, the DMA, to try to create more competition. If it doesn't work, or for different reasons, because there is no, in some cases, it's better to have one ecosystem, then as a backstop, you have the DSA, which aims to ensure a better governance of those big platforms. Because, it's by no means clear that having only small platform is the way to go, So you will have to leave the market decide. But if you have some big tech, because it is the most efficient way, then I think you have to look at their internal governance, and improve it. And that's what the DSA is about. Now, on the slides, but I don't want to discuss that too much because you can find that on the website of the European Commission. But, because many people say, okay, what the DMA has delivered so far. There has been already some change. I wouldn't say that they are massive. That's very clear. But on the other hand, it would be impossible in 1 year to have a massive change. But you had already some change for the business user and for the end user, which can, help, I would say, the agency of the user, end user and business user. But finally, and I think that's probably the most important discussion that we should have here, and to connect to the current, let's say, geopolitical tension, the DMA, the DSA, and most of the new tech law which have been adopted over the last year in Europe, including the AI Act, the Data Act, and so on, are really aiming to pursue a number of values which have been clarified in that declaration of 2022, which has been adopted by the Commission, the Council, and the Parliament on digital right and principle. And you see that there is 6 big, groups of value, putting people at the center, solidarity and inclusion, freedom of choice, and the DMA is really about that. Choice of the user, choice of the business user, participation, safety and security, and sustainability. And all those laws aim to achieve this. The problem we have today is that, we are not anymore in a world of value, fortunately or unfortunately, but we are mostly in a world of power. And the question, of power, and you have now 2 groups, the PayPal mafia, which is running the US to some extent, and the European Commission. And the question, you know, is that and they don't share the same value at all. Okay, they don't share the same value at all. And the question is, who will win? No, I mean, I leave you to guess, but I mean, the point I wanted to make here is that first, you know, if you just have law based on value, that's clearly not enough. I mean, you need to have infrastructure, you need to have the hard power. I mean, soft power, it's not anymore enough in this world. So clearly Europe has to build their own infrastructure. Now, I don't say that we have to replicate everything from scratch. So the Eurostack project, maybe you have heard about it, which is a project which is by a number of academics and foundation, you know, claim that we should do all the infrastructure here, or mostly a lot. I'm not sure that's the way to go, at least in the short term, and I'm not sure that we have the money to do it anyway. But on the other hand, it's clear that by not building anything here, it will not work. And the second thing I would say is that if today we don't enforce very strictly and vehemently the DMA and the DSA, we lose all our credibility. I mean, we should clearly understand that the goal of the Trump administration is to destroy the European Union. Okay. I don't think it's too strong. I mean, I think their point is to destroy the European Union and the Commission. They just want to have member states. So if the European Union is not able to live to their law, they will be destroyed. Okay. So for me, I'm sometimes a little bit worried when I see, for instance, at the Mobile World Congress last week, you had a conference between Virkkunen, I mean, and Carr, the new chair of the FCC, and Carr is saying the DSA is about, I mean, the usual Trump disinformation, the DSA is about censorship and so on. And Virkkunen, who doesn't push back. I mean, that's not normal. I mean, this is just false. When you have Virkkunen who has to go to the US and doesn't go, has to cancel his trip because nobody wants to talk to her, that's terrible. I mean, so I think we really have to think, leave her to the law and enforce it as it should, and be in a medium term build our own infrastructure, because, or at least partly on infrastructure, because we realize that we cannot depend only on this. Voilà, so those are the few messages I wanted to share with you, and I would be really happy to discuss what you think about this.